Hi, I'm Mike Brockman. I'm contributing to the report on the Browns Ferry Fire, and I'm responsible for representing that the mindset, attitude, and training of the workers were important catalysts in the events at the Browns Ferry Fire. Before I start off on those points, I was going to read an excerpt of one of my favorite statements from the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy hearing. So in the statements, they didn't use the names, only codes and job titles, and this was the day of aux operator Q. Probably busiest, most exciting day of anyone there. So he's working in the Rad Waste building, 7 o'clock in the morning on the day shift. Here's the fire alarm, got a CO2 extinguisher, and ran to the reactor building. Talks about somebody else putting an extinguisher on the flame that's now coming into the reactor building. And after that guy was done, he went in with a couple extinguishers and started putting those on the fire himself. Part of the problem at this point, he recognizes, is the air coming through the wall. It's making it very hard to put the fire out. So around this time, his fire brigade leader told him they were bringing the units down, so he ran out to the control room. Everybody pulled out of the area, and at the time, he went to get a fresh air pack, went back to make sure that nobody else was left behind. He then called the control room to see if somebody else was coming down. They didn't send anybody, so he went up there. Talking to somebody in the control room, they told him they were looking for a valve, and they wanted to know if he knew where it was. He said, yeah. So I told him that I was familiar with the valves. He asked me to get them open. I went back to the reactor building and noticed that the smoke was on the first floor, put an air pack on, went down the ladder, the Taurus, and he got the first valve partially open. Ran out of air. Went back to get a second one. Then he heard the safeties lifting. The new fire brigade leader was down there, and he said they should probably go. So those are steam relief safety valves, of course. He hit his mask against something, he got a leak. He's also out of air. There's quite a bit of smoke, and he passed out just outside the watertight door, and he remembers reviving on top of a table in the lunchroom. He doesn't know when he got there, he just rested a bit, went back to the control room, and at that point, talking to somebody, he decided to go try to pull some smoke to the reactor building. So he ended up on the roof of the reactor building with the foreman, starting and stopping a fan with some jumpers, and he went home around 10:30 p.m. So even though there were problems and issues with the fire, there's some pretty fascinating stories there as well. Point one was the state of the fire training and the practices were lacking. So one of the big things that came up were there were metal construction covers over the CO2 pull stations that shouldn't have been there. And you already have to break glass to activate those things. But the second part was that the condition of the respirators, they didn't store all the old ones with the new ones, so a lot of them didn't work, and they had to sift through them when they actually got on scene. Even some of the Chemox suits, so they had Scott Air Packs and Chemox suits, and those were out of order. Didn't work when they tried to activate them. And then Matt's going to expound on this a little bit later, but they had a lot of hesitation to use water on the fire, and so they ended up turning a 2-hour fire into a 7-hour fire because they didn't want to use water on it for a very long time. And so the summary on the state of the fire training is kind of, we have all the stuff, we're just not really sure how to use it. So next I'll present a very simplified schematic, the Browns Ferry Fire layout, and this kind of explains why the fire got started. So here on the left we have the control room, complete with the operating device and a shiny red button, and the cable spreading room in the middle. And that's also known as secondary containment, where the wires are run. So there's a fan that's pretty important, and it maintains vacuum from the control room, and it kind of divides the airspace between the reactor buildings and the control room. Currently in the reactor buildings, Unit 3 was still under construction, and it was sealed off. So this is airtight. But before they put it in service, they were going to have to unseal it. And at this point, the fan here had enough in leakage where it was pretty much at capacity. So any leakage on 3 at all would have caused this to be out of band or out of spec. And the problem at the time was they realized this before they started up Unit 3. So they were going to actually plug a lot of the holes in Unit 1 and Unit 2. And some of those were actually represented by these little red wires here. Wires that were run after the fact, and they weren't sealed so well. So anyway, talking more about my points, second point was that the state of the testing was, let's see what I wrote here, lapses in continuity and adherence in testing allowed for the use of such things as flammable insulation. So there's two electrical engineers of interest in these statements. There's electrical engineer B, and a lot of the other workers on the project spoke of how he warned of the flammable material they were working with, and to be careful. He was telling them about all the fires that were occurring, which there were, and just 2 days earlier, so on March 20th, he had a fire occur when he was working, and so he states specifically the urethane foam had caught fire. Electrical engineer FF, on the other hand, and he'd been employed by TVA for 19.5 years, so pretty senior guy. He starts, actually this is at the end of his statement, but he writes, there's no written procedure that describes the air leak as performed by the aides, and the engineering aide should perform the test after the electrician has completely sealed the penetration. So he's trying to disavow everything about the testing by saying that the testing is just the testing for leakage afterwards. And so everything else that came before is not really a problem. He talks about how the practice of using the sealant and the sheet foam, which they were stuffing in the holes, was around for 2 or 3 years, and he said, we believe that the urethane would not sustain a fire. He doesn't have a very strong we there, because most of the people that were working on this knew that that would. He also talks about how there was a fire on March 20th. A lot of people talked about that fire. I guess it was big news at the time. And he said he didn't know about it until after this latest fire, but the day after that, March 21st, the other engineer and I tested the RTV2 and found that it was self-extinguishing, so he was very confident that none of the stuff they were doing was going to cause fires, but he didn't seem to be actually working on it. He goes on to say in his statement that the sheet foam that they were using was not fire tested or given a safety evaluation. The use of the sheet foam for the application was a field fix that he approved. And that would have been news to his boss. He was not aware that the polyfoam was combustible, but he also understood that the tests had been run on the polyurethane and that it was determined that it was fire retardant. And that influenced his thinking regarding the level of concern. So basically just one lone wolf engineer that's keeping everybody using candles and flammable material to seal up all these holes. And if you think about it, no real need to use candles. You can use a flag on a stick and it does the same job. Point 3 was that the oversight was not fully aware of the risk presented by the fires at their site. So obviously everybody knows that fire can be dangerous, but a lot of the actions that were taking place and the work that was going on didn't really show that they meant it with regards to how the plant was being run. So that's pretty much my oral presentation. Next up, Matt's going to present his on other contributing factors on the fire at Browns Ferry.